Hi friends! This is the long-awaited August wrap-up of everything that I read during the plus-size readathon. Spoiler alert, a lot of it is smut, and I think this is a really great transition into our sponsor of the video. It is someone we know and love, Bellesa. If you haven't gotten the memo yet, get the memo. Bellesa is a bi-women company all about sexual wellness. Their mission, which is something I still practice to this day, especially filming things like this, is for everyone to embrace and explore and celebrate their sexuality. So today I've partnered with them so that we can do a sex toy giveaway. So this first one is a dual stimulation toy. This is called the Air Vibe. As you can see, it's like a little package, very discreet. You got the G-spot stimulation, you got the clit stimulation. This itself is waterproof. It is super quiet, and again comes in this discreet case that plugs into the charger this way, so you can keep that silent and out of the way. Small but powerful. Highly recommend. This next one, again, this charges in the case. It's so cute. Every time I see it, I'm like, my friend's in there. This one's called the Thump. So this one has like the holy trinity of different experiences. We have the innovative Thump technology, which literally just goes like this. Crazy. Also pleasure jet technology on the opposite side, and true feel vibrations all around, so you can't go wrong. This is also waterproof and USB rechargeable inside the case, so whether you like vibration, suction, this has it all. There's also this fun device called the Demi Wand. So this is a vibrator that's meant for everyone and all body types. Very flexible, so you can get anywhere you need to. I also like that it has like this hard angle, so the design is very innovative. It's also very quiet. You can't hear a thing. Also, my hand is like tingling. That was so powerful. Anyway, this feels like a no-brainer at this point, but you know, it comes in the cute case. It recharges in the case. And the best part about it is there aren't any weird vibration pattern modes. It's just the one go-to mode. So if you know, you know. If you are interested in any of these, don't know where to start, maybe the Thump, because there's 3 in 1. You can find out what you like. Once again, everyone who signs up using my link down below, also on the screen, will get something free, whether that's a gift card or a toy. Definitely check that out. Huge thank you to Bellesa for partnering with me. Absolutely love them. And with all that being said, let's launch into the book reviews. So I read a whopping 14 books. Right when I start to feel proud about that, I have to remind myself that half of them were like monster smut novellas, so feel free to be proud of me or feel free to not based off that information. I'm gonna go in them by order, which it's crazy that I read 14 books and all but these were on Kindle Unlimited. So I started out the month with a series. The first book was called Rein Me In by Kayla Gross. This follows a main character named Blake, who 5 years ago, her brother got into an accident and died, so she moved away from her small town in Texas, living on a ranch, to go to the city and escape the trauma, but she has to go back to help her family out on the farm. And while she's in town, she meets Gavin, who was her brother's best friend, and his father has since passed away, and so he's trying to inherit the family business and is struggling because his dad left him a shit show. It's about them reconnecting, and the major plot themes that hit in it are obviously like family issues, both of them respectively dealing with things, and the grief that both of them are experiencing, and then how they come together through that. I feel like I really made that synopsis sell well, but to be very honest with you, this book's writing was very basic. It is very much telling you the story and not showing you the story, and even the way that the author tells it is very rudimentary, like such cliche turns of phrase. Nothing felt innovative. The way the characters talk was almost textbook. Like if you told, I don't want to compare it to AI because that's a whole conversation, but it really had no soul to it. I do think it was awkward, especially during the sex scenes. The dialogue could be so clunky because they all just used very cliche turns of phrase in every conversation. You didn't feel like they were real people. But I will say, and the reason this didn't get like 2 stars, this got 3.5 from me. The last 25% of this book went crazy. I was also about to start my period when I read this, so I was like extra emotional, and I ended up crying at the end of this book. It was a lot, but the last 25%, shit hits the fan. And I think this book, even though it could be a bit basic, has the bones, and the array of characters in it was so interesting to drive the plot along. So I was just rooting for them. Like it was good. I wish it had an editor. You know, that's like the one thing that sticks out to me, is this had so much potential. But like I said, I read the second book in the series afterward also, which is called Rope Me In. And that one follows this main dude's brother named Cade, who is frequently in the first book. And whereas Gavin is like the family leader, like trying to get their lives together, Cade is the one who went batshit and is like an alcoholic, is sleeping around with people, just very shady, very unpredictable, just a dude bro who lost his dad and can't process his emotions. But the second one follows him, which I think sadly means you have to read book 1 in order to read this one. But it's him and a new girl that comes to town because she's in a band and she's a fiddler and she's like also trying to escape a weird situationship with a bandmate, and they meet and it's like instant connection. And that girl, oh, I didn't even mention the main character of book 1, Blake, is fat. Presley, who's this new main character of book 2, is also fat. So both of them are like fat cowgirls and they got their little rodeo boyfriends. In book 1, I felt it was a little bit more softly added to the plot, where she would be like, oh, I love riding horses, and as a fat girl who's too fat to ride horses, I was like, good for you. But then in book 2, she's more of like a city girl that comes to Texas, which that was incredible for like an opposites attract kind of plot point. But she did have a lot of insecurity around her weight. And guys, the tropes in this book, I just said guys, I hate when YouTubers call your audience guys. Guys, the tropes in this book, bondage and praise kink, the way that he would hype her up for her body through that, and also just in general, you know, like being a nice person, it was handled so well. I loved it. They did give each other pet names, and the guy called her Lemon, which I thought was so dumb. There's a backstory, but I hated it. The writing style on this one definitely improved, and I just enjoyed it more because it was about a much more interesting main character versus book 1, because this guy is so troubled and he's battling depression. And that's another thing, he was really struggling with depression, and the female main character has anxieties. Those were constantly woven into the book, but it was never the plot of like, I'm gonna fix you. At the end, there's such a nice resolution about how they go about fixing it, so I think it ended up having a great message. The only thing that took this down from a 5 stars, other than the writing was still a bit basic, was the drama was kind of repetitive, of everyone being like, you need to step up and be a family man, stop being a baby and sleeping around, and then he would get mad at his brother. It was just a lot of fighting about the same thing over and over. But again, I do think the characters were interesting and I understood why they did what they did. I was not expecting to love this book this much, but I was kind of gagging at it. It was so good. And book 3 comes out next year sometime. It's on the TBR, unfortunately. And this has now started a spur of me wanting to read a bunch of Western romances because I loved it as a Texan girl. I just felt I so identified with it. So these were just really fun. Not the best things you'll ever read, and do not go into them expecting them to be really greatly written, but 2 thumbs up for me. It was a fun time if you can switch off that part of your brain. So the next book I read was Washed Up by L.E. Eldridge. This is a Kraken novella about a woman named Quinn who works on a cruise ship as a chef and gets thrown overboard in like a tussle with a guy, which realistically, would that kill you? Someone let me know if you're a physicist. But instead of dying, she gets rescued by this Kraken and taken to an island where monsters live. Very Stockholm syndrome, but not acute Stockholm syndrome like Beauty and the Beast. It was very insta-love Stockholm syndrome, and she just didn't question being on this island and didn't really want to go back to the human world, even though she just literally disappeared off a boat. Anyway, this Kraken is non-binary. I mean, I know this was a novella and I can't expect a lot out of it, but there was just no world building. The relationship between them was just okay. And one thing I know about myself is I'm not a person who's into tentacles. I don't know why I read this. Probably, you know what? I know why I read it. The cover and just her rolls in her bikini. I'm like biting my lip. I don't know. I just love the representation of the cover. The fat rep in it was a bit okay. Like, it wasn't really a prominent plot point. They didn't really talk about it, but Jorah is the Kraken that takes her from the ocean and nurses her back to health. And I thought they were really nice. I genuinely don't remember much about them, to be honest, so I just remember thinking how implausible this book was, which it is. It's about Squidward fuckers. I don't know, tentacles, I can't do it, so I give it 2.5 stars. It was just okay. But then the novella I read after that, I read Muscles and Monsters by Ashley Bennett. Tegan's a human, Atlas is a wolf. Despite that, I actually really liked this book. I give it 4 stars. This book was dumb, but in the best way. It like didn't take itself too seriously, and it was actually laugh out loud funny at certain points. The characters' banter was so cheesy, but in a lovable way and not like an obnoxious way where I'm just picturing the author giggling at themselves behind their own laptop. And despite this having a integrated human and monster world, and it's a novella, it still felt really well explained, and I liked the world building to the point where I would have read a full-length novel of these characters or of this world. The pacing in this book was incredible. There was no filler material. It all made sense, and it wasn't just like gratuitous sex. I will say on the plus size rep side, the female main character is plus size, not really mentioned. It's more so a thing on the cover. But even if this was just an excuse for me to find that book and read it, I'm happy I did, because it was a lot of fun. And if you just need something that's like brain candy, get your dopamine hit, that book was really fun. All right, the first physical book, The Do's and Donuts of Love by Abida Jagordar. So this one follows the main character Shireen, who just recently broke up with her girlfriend Chris, but they are set to be rivals on like a junior British bake-off show or junior Irish bake-off show. It's set in Ireland. There's like a little bit of a love triangle with a new girl that she meets on the show, and throughout the book you start to learn why they broke up and the history of their relationship. After finishing this, I immediately added all of this author's other books onto my TBR because I thought it was so good. The writing was punny and funny without being cheesy, which I think is such a specific intersection that's hard to nail, so I just really applauded it. And also, this author was not afraid to make this character unlikable and give her negative qualities, because there were times in this book where she was a bitch, and there were times where she was like blaming people for things that were out of their control. So I just liked that she was given those hints of unlikable qualities. But on the flip side, I thought the author's note was so sweet. She intentionally made this main character's parents very accepting of not only her sexuality but her body and her weight, because that's often something, you know, in South Asian culture that's not celebrated, or is actively, you know, the opposite, where they try and get you skinnier and shame you for liking food, even though food is a big part of culture. So I loved that discussion in it. I also liked that it integrated, because it's such a public, you know, TV show where they're having this bake-off. It starts to talk about social media and the reactions of people on social media to a dark-skinned girl competing and all the racism that emerges from that. So even though it was like a cute little romance book about her and her ex and this other contestant on the show, it also had those really great discussions in it as well, and I learned a lot. I do think that the love triangle was a bit predictable. However, the baking show sections where they're actually competing was really kept it really fresh and very fast paced. This book flew by. It was so easy to read and I really enjoyed it. I gave this 4 stars. I definitely recommend it, and I cannot wait to go back and read this author's other books because I had such a fun time. This cover makes this book look like it's middle grade, but it is not. It was so good. Highly recommend this. Transitioning from that is actually one of the worst books I read, not just for this readathon, not even of this year, but of all time. I hated this book, and I had quite a few 1-star books for this readathon, so I really need to select better options next year, not just go off of my hind brain wanting smut. Anyway, I read a book called A Vampire in the Bookstore by L.M. Drew. This one is about a girl named Rosamund and a guy named Declan who meet in a bookstore. They both are lovers of vintage books and collecting, and quite plotlessly and irrationally, they are just gobsmacked by each other and need to be together forever. And then they just go home and have sex. It was so confusing. I'm just gonna spoil it too, because don't read this book. The woman knew that this guy was a vampire and she was seeking immortality, and that was never explained. The guy is immediately entranced by her because she's like, oh, the binding of this vintage book is so, like, she knew a lot about bookbinding because she was a professor or something, and he was so attracted to her just for knowing about books. And they both were so pretentious, and their dialogue was so overwritten because it really wanted to prove that these were literary people who loved manuscript binding and all this pretentious ass shit. I was like, oh my god. So between all the plot holes and things that were not explained and just the bullshit writing style and the dialogue that was so hard to get through, finally you get to the end of the book. I was like, maybe I won't DNF this because maybe the sex scene is good because I haven't read a vampire book in a while. Let's just see. And it was so much worse. The sex sex was not just bad, it was so problematic because the entire time Declan was just thinking about murdering her, and I mean that so seriously. He was like imagining breaking her bones, and he would be like draining her blood and then feeding it back to her so that she wouldn't die. It was so icky. It was so icky. I know there's like blood and pain kink, but this went so far beyond that. I was so uncomfy. I feel like I trusted this author. Now I don't anymore. So we'll see if that relationship ever gets mended, but I really hated it. I literally put 0 stars on my notes document because I didn't even want to give it one. One of the worst books I've ever read. Somehow unbearable to get through even though it was so short. Don't rate that. It was terrible. Back to physical books because clearly I needed to escape from there. I was so excited for this book. It's Barely Even Friends by Mae Bennett, which is her debut novel. Clearly a retelling of Beauty and the Beast, which is my go-to shit. So the main character in this is Bellamy, and she goes to the Beast's house. His name's Oliver. His family's rich. They own this mansion that is crumbling. So she is hired as the restoration person. So she lives there with him while she does the construction. He hates that she's there, but then it's obviously enemies to lovers, so he begins to tolerate her and they work together. I had such high hopes for this is what I'll start off saying. By that you can probably tell I didn't love it. I gave this one 3 stars. I loved that this followed Beauty and the Beast so closely. Even the house itself had this quality where, you know, at the beginning of Beauty and the Beast where she's just hearing voices and you don't know the furniture is talking, so it's just disembodied. There's a AI system in this house that like responds to you. It's almost like a smart house twist to Beauty and the Beast, which I love smart house, which is why House of Silver Flames or whatever is so good. Court of Silver Flames. But that began the long tunnel of shit just not making sense because this house is crumbling and there's no Wi-Fi, and yet that's in there. And there's certain parts of the house that are off limits and this guy is so mysterious, but then really quickly he starts to like tell her about his life even though they barely know each other. It just felt like the enemies to lovers got resolved too soon and there were so many plot holes, which was not made better by the fact that the writing was also pretty disjointed. Like they would start a chapter meaning to finish something and then they'd do something else and never go back to the original thing. And each chapter was like a random project where you didn't really know what was gonna happen next. And they're doing this whole house restoration on a timeline that just jumps so randomly. It just was so disjointed and I hated that because I wish I could have loved this more. And plot aside, the romance that developed was also just a bit lackluster. I think because it was really missing those critical moments of these characters having a connection that made you like, you know, tingly. Because nothing was really sexy about them getting together. One of the scenes where they were like getting handsy with each other was them like washing walls, which, you know, an author could make that interesting and make you take a small moment and turn it into something significant, but it would just fell so flat. So even their first kiss felt oddly timed and didn't really work out. I will say the sex scene though, the singular sex scene, the guy was the one who was a little bit bashful and rusty, so I thought that that was a nice flip of your expectations. He was also an ex-football player, so he deals with some old injuries with his body. Can be a little bit of a disability to him, so I liked those discussions, especially around vulnerability, but I was overall let down by this one. It was okay. I thought I was gonna give this 5 stars. Boo. As is probably predictable, I returned to Kindle Unlimited and I grabbed a couple more monster smut novellas. So the first one, Discovery of the Century, I read a book by Gillian Graves for the first time, so I tried Blood Moon, which is another vampire novella, and I think I needed to mentally recover from the shit show that was The Vampire in the Bookstore. And I just love vampire books and I don't read enough of them, and I call this a book even though it's not, it's a novella. This was a very brief one about a main character named Hazel and a guy named Vlad. Hazel's a witch, Vlad's a vampire, if you couldn't guess from the stereotypical names. There's not a whole lot of plot to this other than they both work on opposite sides of the street to each other. One's like a family-owned bar, the other's this corporate bar, so they're competing with each other and rivals to lovers, but they have a one-night stand before they know that either of them is the bar owners. This is complicated. I will say you don't really need to care about the plot because the smut in this was ungodly. It was immaculate. It was filthy. So even though this feels like a sequel, because I think it's technically a novella within or between some of her other monster series, so some of the side characters and plot are underbaked. If you can get over that because you just want fucking and sucking, this book was so good. The main character is also a tall, fat main character. She was over 6 feet tall. She was very confident in her body. It didn't feel like just something they added onto the cover to sprinkle it in. It was like, you know, prominent, and the guy also loved her for it. I don't think I even mentioned in this last book, she's like a little bit plus sized. I don't think it was even part of the plot really at all. But anyway. Anyway, yeah, the plot here, weak. The smut made me weak, you know? So I loved that book so much. I wanted to continue on and read more Gillian Graves. So I started a different novella by her that was called The Stone and the Star. This one's about an art professor who lives on campus and always looks out her window at this, I'm looking out my window, at a gargoyle who's on a building across from her. And she just thinks he's so sexy. Doesn't realize he's real. So this gargoyle named Colossus watches her watch him, and finally one day like makes the move. There is a bit of a period, and this book is also 80 pages, so it's a stretch to call it a book. It felt more like an erotica story rather than a book or even a novella, and a lot of that was taken up by her reacting to him being a gargoyle, which I think is so annoying in monster romance because I think it wastes time to go through the whole period of, oh my god, you're real? Oh my god, that's dangerous. Oh my god, I'm so bad for liking you. I like it a lot more when it's like human and monster integrated worlds. The characters were just okay. There was like one smut scene. It was kind of hard to read. I don't know, I didn't gel with this one. I've read books about gargoyles that were a lot better. I do like it was set on a college campus and she was an art professor, and there's like this sculptor slash sculpture relationship happening, but it just fell flat for me, so I gave it 2.5 stars. Which is sad because the cover is gorgeous and she's this beautiful big fat woman on the cover, and it just like doesn't really talk about that, so I was sad. Anyway, returning to another physical read, I was highly recommended Brazen and the Beast for this readathon. This was my first book I'd ever read by Sarah McLean. So this book follows a woman named Hattie who's about to turn 30, and she decides she's gonna take over her life and get better in finances and in men, and she's gonna lose her virginity, and she wants to dedicate herself to her business. So the only person that can get in the way of that is this guy that she meets named Beast. He's a criminal, and her brother, who also works at her family company, has like fucked with his business, and he's trying to use her to get back at him, and he's threatening her, but she's like, don't ruin my company, I want it, I need to take it over from my brother who's a loser. There's so much politics in this, and I will say I got like 80 pages into this and then put it down, not because it was terrible, but because I loved it so much I needed to read book 1. This is book 2 in the series, and everyone said you don't need to read book 1, but I loved it so far, and I knew I wanted all the context, so I went back and read the first one, so I'll put a pause on that. I read Wicked and the Wallflower, which is on Kindle Unlimited, as well as this one and the third one, so go get your juice. That one follows a woman named Felicity and the brother of the guy from book 2, whose name is Devil, which is obviously Devil and Beast are like street names. They have real ones that are less stupid. Felicity is in her mid-20s, and it's again, like, she used to be the shiny thing back when she was first coming out and trying to get married. She was adored, and now that she's past her prime, she just feels like a loser and has having to grapple with that. She meets this criminal guy because she's desperate for someone, and he's like, well, I'll set you up with my brother. And there's this whole plot with their third brother who is evil or something, and so he was gonna set this girl up with him to get back at the brother because she could spy on him. That's the worst synopsis, but I genuinely can't explain it better because this mythical brother who's the villain is so unexplained across both books, and he's the villain of both books. And I've been told under my reviews now that he's part of other series, and this series connects with other series. I'm gonna need authors to stop doing that. Why did we Cassie clarify every single series where you have to read 6 things to get to the next thing? I just wish there was better context about what the fuck is this other brother's problem, and also why is book 3 about him? I have not started book 3 because I'm like, what do you mean he's the love interest after almost killing all these characters multiple times in these 2 books? But anyway, back to book 1, Felicity and Devil. I loved the idea that she, one, grew up from the rich part of town and he came from the slum. So again, it's that opposites attract. Oh, and obviously when he's on the mission of sailing her off to someone else, he ends up falling for her and they have a thing. But he has this whole disposition where he's thinking, I'm gonna ruin you if I fall in love with you. Like, you are so much better than me, you deserve so much better than me, like, you cannot have me. And she's just like, you idiot, I want you. And she wants him to teach her like how to be this sparkling, attractive thing again in society so that people will pay attention to her, someone will fall in love with her, and it's him. So he doesn't want to help her find someone else, but he doesn't also want her to have him. So there's a lot of emotional back and forth with those kinds of plot points because it's a lot of butting heads about yearning and positions in society and all those things. This book is also so plot heavy and political, and I still was like grasping onto every word. So I adore the relationship. I will bookend this review just by telling you all the Taylor Swift songs that reminded me of. So first of all, Down Bad, because the whole plot of he would give her an inch and be like, okay fine, maybe we can kiss a little bit, and then he'd be like, absolutely not, you don't belong in the slums, like I have to bring you back. So it's very Down Bad, like how dare you beam me up and then just bring me back to my town, sent me back where I came from. So it reminded me so much of that. It's so similar. Also Better Than Revenge, because she has this line that she loves to use about how she wants to be a flame so she can attract moths to a flame. You see where I'm going with this? She says it so often. It's honestly a bit repetitive, but it was such an apt metaphor. I just loved it. So I was thinking of Better Than Revenge the whole time. And finally, like I said, this is me trying because she's just this has-been wallflower. So for any girl to relate to having the shiniest wheels but now they're rusting, you would relate to Felicity. 30,000 years later, I returned to book 2. Oh, book 1, it's close to 5 stars, but it's 4. If I had gotten a better explanation of the brother, I would have done 5. And same with this one. I actually bumped this one up to 4.5 stars because I enjoyed it just a little bit more. I think the difference between this one and book 1 is that Hattie is smart. And like, Felicity is amazing. I have no complaints with her as a main character. Despite being a wallflower, she was still very strong and inserted her opinion and loved her. In this book, Hattie takes no shit. She is smart. She goes head to head with the men. Despite being inexperienced, she knows what she wants, so she's very headstrong. Again, there's a lot of plot around the romance, and even though the romantic elements are so woven into it because these characters' lives almost revolve around each other during this whole scuffle, it was so addicting. I did think that there was a really weird contrast between the characters saying, "You're my enemy, stop trying to ruin my life, holy shit, you're the worst," and then they like fuck in a closet. Like, what are we doing here? So there's a lot of back and forth and turbulent emotions similar to book 1, so if you hate that kind of thing, I don't know that you'd like this. But I really identified with Hattie in this book because she is of the mindset that she's too fat or too loud or too manly to be loved, and she has already internalized almost being 30 and never having gotten married or engaged. Oh my god, Beast was just the perfect match for her. And that's another thing about this book is the smut and Beast's dirty talking in this are like leagues better than book 1, and book 1 was already incredible. So if you want to be like fanning yourself in public, even in scenes where they're just looking at each other from across a room, this book was immaculate. Highly recommend. I am gonna read book 3 eventually, but I still don't understand the lore with that weird brother who's evil, so I don't know when. Alrighty, we are down to the last 2 books, and unfortunately it's gonna be downhill from here. So I read 2 1-star books to finish off this readathon. I couldn't have picked a better book. I couldn't have ended it on a good note if I tried. But the first one I will just skim over. It's another novella. I started yearning for her. It is a succubus and human relationship between Willow and Kian. So Willow just broke up with her boyfriend who's a loser, and on the way home meets this guy named Kian who's sexy, so they have a one-night stand, who's a succubus, so he literally, his life is sustained by having sex with people. It recharges him, so to speak. So he just goes around having sex like daily and goes through people and just has one-night stands all the time, but when he has sex with her, he mates and bonds to her. So she's still in the mindset that she doesn't want a long-term relationship after getting out of her old one, but he's like, hey, what if I die? And that whole tone of it really set off kind of a gross narrative of him being coercive and almost like, you know you want it, you know you want me, please, like in an icky requesting way, and not just in a way where he was seducing her. Also, this book tried to make it so that she wants him to convince her that they're right to be in a relationship, so she's like, get to know me, take me on dates, impress me. And he knows nothing about humans because he's never needed to care before, so he's like guessing like, ooh, flowers, I don't know. And that part of it was also so unsexy, where it's like, oh, so you don't understand women or what they want. He was just telling on himself for being cringe and like not attentive to women, but then they would have these whirlwind sex scenes and I'm like, but you just spent 200 pages being annoying and cringe. And I found out after I finished this book that the author is not an author, it's a duo of a wife and husband, and I could just feel the husband's grimy fingerprints all over this because I was like, of course a man had to write about a man being yucky and weird. So I give that book 1 star. It was also just boring. I think I said this was a novella and it's not. This was a full-length novel of, you tell me, what was that needed for? I was happy for that to be over. I definitely skim read the final third of it. And to end off this doozy, again, I wish we could end on a better note. I finished At First Spite by Olivia Dade, which is my last book I'm ever gonna read by Olivia Dade. I decided. I adore her covers. I respect and appreciate what she does in the romance genre for plus size women. I will not discount her for that because I think more people need to see people of this body size being happy and falling in love, especially people like me. I just cannot handle her writing style for 2 more pages longer. I'm so over it. This book is hard to describe very succinctly, but it's basically about Athena who, after breaking off her engagement with her ex-fiance, moves in next door to him because she bought like a house that was for sale next to him, intending for once they were married for him to add it onto his. It's a whole thing. And the brother lives on the other side of her, so she's sandwiched between these 2 brothers. One of them's her ex and one of them is the guy who told him to break up with her and break off the engagement. So she hates both of them, but she's between jobs and she has nowhere to go but this place that she bought, so she lives there. And then it's about her and the brother who convinced him to break it off. He feels really bad, so they start to talk. Does it sound bad? Because it was. It's really hard to describe. Basically, they're just in a small town and they're people who have emotional beef because of past circumstances. I'll start off with the positives of this book. The main characters are in their late 30s, which I think is also representation that we need. I also really related to Athena because she has struggles with depressive episodes where she doesn't shower and she lays in bed and she doesn't talk to anyone, and I like how that was represented and handled. Yeah, I think that's about it. So let's launch into the things I didn't like. Primarily, I hate Olivia Dade's writing style. I think she has the most awful references and cringe memes and unrealistic, overly written dialogue to the point where it's so unrealistic that the characters don't feel like they're real people, but then all I see is the characters from the other character's point of view, and I'm like, how can you not hate this woman for talking the way that she does? You're sitting there laughing at her jokes. The characters were so pretentious in this one. They both were like obsessed with Googling things and learning more, which I guess is a fun thing to do. Matthew, the love interest, is also a pediatrician, and he had this weird thing where he was so concerned about her health, where even if she got a paper cut, he would be babying her to fix it, and like, especially when she starts struggling with her mental health, and for some reason he never mentions her weight as part of that, but he'll always intrude and be like, you need to do this, don't do this, do this. I didn't like it. It just felt so infantilizing, and it just was icky. Okay, there was also a really predictable and unnecessary 3rd act breakup in this. Like I said, this book is already overwritten. We don't need to waste any more time there. I just have to pull the plug because I do not think this author is for me, and that is just such an unceremonious way to have to end this video. Is I just did not like that book, and it took me over a week into September to finish it, so I got stuck on it for a couple weeks, and I'm sad that I didn't choose something else that I could have flown through and loved, but that's just the way the cookie crumbled that time. But yeah, with that, those were all the books that I read. Looking back on it, I didn't realize the quantity of mediocre books that I chose to read. I think I was going for the things that were easier and I could shut my brain off to read, when maybe I should have focused on the things I thought I might rate 5 stars. Oh well, there's always next year. I also still have a ton of them downloaded, so I can start sprinkling more books about plus size people throughout my TBR over the course of the year and not just in August. Okay, I've chatted your ear off enough. Let me know if you enjoyed any of these books. Please hold me accountable, and anytime I put monster porn on my TBR again, please tell me to not read that because there's so many better things available. Do not forget to go click my link for Valessa and get your free toy or gift card down below. And as always, thank you for your support when I get sponsors, and thank you in general just for being here. I'm sure this is like a half-hour video, so appreciate you making it to the end. As a reward, do you want... I was gonna say, should Gordo honk for you, and you just did. Take it away, Gordo. Good boy. Hope you enjoyed that. Bye, friends. fucking Christ. During my ad spot, Gordon Ramsay. Mommy's trying to sell vibrators so we can pay rent.